Get my ass kicked at least 3 times. If I don't get my ass kicked at least 3 times a week, I'm not happy.
Well, that's a better introduction to the show than what I could have given. But, anyways, welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and with us today is Mark Pellegrino, actor and objectivist philosopher extraordinaire. This is an off the cuff interview, so I don't really have anything planned, but we're going to do our best, and I'm sure we'll get through it. Mark, thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for accommodating me because I'm in Paris. My schedule's pretty crazy working on my wife's film. I just realized, oh, I have the day off today. We might as well try to squeeze one of these things in while I'm actually not working on the film. And so you were able to accommodate me. That's great. Thank you.
Well, I think of it kind of as you accommodating me because really I don't have much to do and, and you've got a lot to do. So, like I said, you're an objectivist, you're an actor, and you've also really taken on the mantle of arguing for Israel's right to destroy Hamas.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of causes out there, but this is something you've really taken to. Why? Like, what is it about the Israel Hamas thing that has really grabbed your attention?
It seems to be a crucible of sorts. It seems to be the catalyst for the fight for Western civilization. So the pro-Palestinian side has accumulated all the people who are against Western civilization and the advancement of Republican representative government and capitalism. They've all accumulated on that side behind that cause. And they're trying to use the paradoxes to sow chaos in our own society. And their whole goal is the elimination of capitalism, the obliteration of Western civilization. It just so happens that this iteration of that, the pro-Palestinian pan-Arabic Islamo-fascist movement, is their latest ally in that attempt to do that. And so allied on that side are all those forces that I think are forces of bad, and allied on the other side are, for the most part, secular people who believe in secular government and free markets. There's a wide degree of fluctuation within the philosophies of all the people that inhabit that, but their overall goal is to advance Western civilization and to hang on to what you and I would probably consider to be the pillars of a decent society. And we have different reasons for holding on to those pillars than some of my allies do, but right now these are the people on the front lines fighting against the decay of our society.
Okay, so Western civilization, it's worthy of defense. But let me help you to steelman this argument a little bit. The
Mm-hmm.
idea is that Israel, as a whole, the country of Israel, are morally superior to the Islamo-fascists, as you call them, right? Okay. But Israel, for instance, high taxation, very socialist, both in its founding and in its existence today, heavy emphasis on the Jewish faith. They have a draft also, for instance, which is, I think, highly, highly unethical. Uh, you've got some evidence of corruption in the government. I don't know how accurate it is. I just know that it's there. So Israel is not exactly a paragon of liberty and capitalism. So what about Israel makes them morally superior? And the problem is like, okay, if you have a pickpocket and a murderer, I would say, well, the pickpocket's not as bad as the murderer, but I wouldn't then defend the pickpocket. So how do you arrive at the conclusion that Israel is worthy of, because you put a lot of effort into this and you get into some real dust ups and you had to, it's not as if you are just Teflon here, right? You put up with a lot of people. They say a lot of rude things to you. They don't engage your intellect. They just insult, whatever. And being an actor and, working in a predominantly left-wing industry, I can't imagine it's easy also to be defending Israel. So why is it worth it? And why are they worthy of your defense?
When Rand defended America, she didn't defend America based on what it is. She based her defense of America on its founding principles. Its founding principles were the greatest governing principles to ever be handed down to us in civilization. once those principles are in place in the form of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, of course, they can be perverted through time and with political movements, but the principles are there and they serve as a guidepost for us and a standard for us to evaluate whether the current government is good or bad. And for you and I think the Declaration of Independence is a very good standard, a standard for how our government should, what moral foundations our government should rest on. Well, every quote unquote free democratic state in the world has been affected by our declaration, by our American Enlightenment, but is nonetheless corrupted by other influences that came up during the Enlightenment as well. No free society is quote unquote completely free. But I would back the free societies, those that more or less attempt to create a society based upon the concept of rights, even if their concept of rights is a rather unfortunate concept or a confused concept. They understand that rights need to be the moral foundation of society. Israel is the only country in that entire region of 22 or 23 countries that recognizes the concept of rights, the concept that you need a nation based on law, predominantly secular law, revolving around Western ideas of due process and Western democratic ideals with respect to freedom of speech, dissent, petition of government for grievances. All of those things are the operative mechanisms that make a government more or less a defender of the rights of the individual citizens. It's the only country in that region that even approaches that idea. And the fact that it is in its common law tradition to approach the law and its relationship to the people in that respect means it can become philosophically pure. There are contradictions, of course, in the Israeli social and political system because of its acceptance of religion in the court system and in the political system and in the social system. I don't know that those are necessarily recoverable because Judaism is at once sort of seen as an ethnicity and national identity and a religion. So it's a little hard to separate those things out. But those paradoxical elements, nonetheless, though they detract from Israel's purity as a quote unquote democracy, they don't entirely rob it of its democratic values. And so those are the most powerful, and those are those are the values that I'm defending in the same way that I would defend the United States, given all of its contradictions. Contradictions that the other side tries to use to sow chaos here, by the way. They take those contradictions, which are true, and then they try to define the entire system by those contradictions, just like they try to define the entire system of Israel by those contradictions. And those contradictions are certainly undermining to the overall, premise and the goal of liberty in societies. But they're present. And since they're present, there's something to build upon. Nothing remotely close to that exists in the other countries, remotely close.
Well, that certainly sounds like a good argument to me. Now, one of your primary antagonists on the platform formerly known as Twitter is the comic Dave Smith, the libertarian.
Yeah.
And he makes the argument that, okay, a country does have the right to defend itself, or the Israelis do have the right to defend themselves. But once Hamas is gone, once they've retreated back amongst their population, he says it's
that's
no
different.
longer.
Those are two different things.
Okay, he says that you no longer have self-defense, so you no longer have the right to do this. And he makes an analogy. He says if a guy comes and robs you, and then the guy runs away and he goes into his house and his family and kids are there, you don't have a right to go blow up the house. I'm not sure I'm using his exact example, but I think I've captured the principle there. So how do you answer that?
Well, first of all, Hamas being gone and or disappearing into the population are two different things. Them disappearing into the population is what they do. They use people as an artifact of war. That's simply what they do, and they're relatively novel in that approach to warfare. But they're not gone, and they're still politically viable. They're still militarily viable, and no decent neighbor, a self-respecting neighbor would want to live next door to a murderer that's still active. Hamas being gone is a different thing entirely. That means their military apparatus is gone, their ideological influence is gone. That's an entire decade's worth of work, which means not only eradicating the military apparatus of Hamas, but occupying that country and reconditioning the entire population in the same way that we had to do with Japan. When MacArthur became the military governor of Japan and forced constitutional norms down their throats. As far as I'm concerned, that was a decent thing to do. He eliminated Japanese imperialism and chauvinism from the face of the earth, which is exactly what should have happened, just as we did to Nazism. Now, you can't completely kill an ideology. There's going to be adherents to it, around and about. But when you show that the ideology leads to sure destruction and death, the adherents will be few and far between, and they won't become any actual threat to the state. Now, his analogies always go south for me because he confuses a police action with war. And a police action is the police, if he's adopting our premise with respect to the state, and the police are there to protect the population, right, of that state. That's what they're there to do. And so if the guy traps himself in a building with a bunch of hostages and or people surrounding him, innocent people, the object of the police would be to protect the citizens to the highest degree that they possibly can. And that would probably mean a more surgical operation. They wouldn't. Israel doesn't indiscriminately bomb. It's an exaggeration to say that's what they do. However, we're talking about a quasi-state versus another state. We're talking about a people versus another people. The protection of the citizens of Hamas is the protection of the citizens of Gaza is on Hamas. It's not Israel's responsibility to protect them. It's their responsibility to protect their citizens. Once Hamas breached their border and declared war, it is a war between people. In this case, the complicit nature of the relationship between Hamas and the Palestinian people is undeniable. In some cases, it could be a lot more gray. In this, it's really undeniable. And so hiding amongst the population is no reason for Israel to stop its defense of its own people. It can't allow the murderers to run free because they're hiding behind accomplices, even unwilling accomplices. It can't let them run free, given that calculus. So on the one hand, we have a state set up to protect those within the state. On the other hand, we have two states warring against each other whose moral justification is the defense of their own people. One side has completely abused that concept, and they do the opposite. The other side is doing that with as wholehearted an attempt at defense as they can muster, given all the worldwide political pressure that they're experiencing.
Now, you mentioned the breach of the border. That, in large part, is the fault of the Israelis. I don't mean that Hamas crossed the border. I mean that the border was crossable to begin with. It was in large part, failure of Israeli intelligence, Israeli military. And the argument goes that if you just did what you were supposed to do and secured the border, then you don't have to go and kill Palestinians because you're going to be safe. Do you think there's any truth to that?
I think it's irrelevant.
Okay.
Yeah, mistakes and these bad guys poured over the border and murdered a bunch of innocent people. The fact that this cancer exists in the Middle East and has been allowed to flourish in Gaza, that's the real problem. And their object should be to take that cancer out, to completely cut it out of the Middle East. And one of the reasons I support that war is because, look, this is a cancer that's manifesting, metastasizing, if you will, across multiple states. It's not just in the Middle East. It's not just in Lebanon. It's not just in Syria. It's not just in Iraq, but it's in North Africa. It's in Southern and Eastern Europe. It's metastasizing into China and into parts of Europe as well, with migrants that are coming over from the Middle East and bringing these ideas and these ideals, which I don't consider ideals, but they're bringing them into the West and expecting the West to adopt them. And so this is a very real crisis where from 1979 on, Islamo-fascists have been inspired to carry on this worldwide jihad for decades upon decades upon decades because they've never been led to experience annihilation and total destruction because of their ideology. And because it's been a tit for tat sort of business from 1979 on, they've grown a great deal of confidence. And they think that Allah is on their side until and unless the war becomes so destructive and so uncomfortable for them that they understand this ideology will only bring them death, starvation, and annihilation, at which point they will stop. And this movement will stop metastasizing around the world. I don't think the rest of the world should accept it. Then again, I'm one of these guys that don't think just because you're born in the United States that you should be a citizen. I think if you hold ideas that are antithetical to individual rights, you shouldn't even vote. You shouldn't even be given the power to have a political voice. Now, that would be considered by some to be undemocratic, and it is undemocratic, but it's not antithetical to individual rights.
No, I would agree, but it would be unconstitutional. There you'd have a bit of a problem.
Not really. Not if states.
Not if you had an amendment. You could if you got an amendment, but that would require voting. So you.
But remember why I say this. These ideals that are antithetical to individual rights are all violence-based. They're all about imposing the will of some group over another. And that's not what a free state is about or a free society is about.
That's true. Okay, so I'd be remiss if I didn't give you what Dave thinks or seems to think is his knockout punch of an argument. And that's that the whole existence of Hamas, or the reason Hamas has been allowed to stay in power, is because Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately propped up Hamas by allowing Qatari money to be funneled into Gaza. And he did this solely for the purpose of creating division between Hamas and Fatah, and thereby, if you separate the West Bank and Gaza, you would be able to deprive the Palestinians of a state. And he believes that that is what ultimately, that dynamic is what angers Palestinians, is the Israeli oppression, Israeli corruption. That why would Palestinians, or it's an explanation, for an additional explanation why Palestinians hate Israelis, because they're deliberately doing this to deprive them of a state. So how do you answer? I'll give my answer too to this, by the way. I just want to hear yours.
The Palestinians have deprived themselves of a state. When they've been offered state solutions over and over again, they've rejected those solutions. So it's clear that they don't want a state. They want the Jews to be gone. That's different. That's an entirely different basis. And that's what makes them mad, is that they can't have the Jews be gone. They're not going to consider options that already have an Israeli state on the table as a part of the condition. That's just a done deal. No, they want to negotiate other terms if that's considered a negotiation, and that's simply not true. Now, I don't know about Benjamin Netanyahu's funding Hamas. What I do know is that Hamas was forced on Israel by the United States. Bush thought, as he did in Iraq, erroneously, that the human heart wanted liberty. And so he thought if he could bring elections to the Middle East, they would elect people who were democratically natured, and that the whole political face of the Middle East would be changed. Of course, we saw that that wasn't the case in Iraq. It's not the case with humanity in general. It's a naive perspective. And it wasn't the case in Gaza, where Hamas was elected into power by a majority of the people in Hamas, and then Hamas proceeded to destroy their political opposition.
Hold on one second, Mark. I believe they were elected by a plurality. I don't think
by a plurality. Yeah,
okay.
Something in the neighborhood of a high 40%.
Yeah.
But then they went and destroyed the political opposition.
Yeah.
But since that time, the support for Hamas, the moral support, has grown rather exponentially, especially in the West Bank, who are not experiencing what Gaza is experiencing, but their support has gone up to somewhere in the 70 percentile. So first of all, the fact that a politician lacks principle and would do what he considers to be the pragmatic thing, which is, I'm forced to take this deal. I'm forced to deal with these political enemies in my backyard. I might as well try to leverage it to my advantage is no surprise to me. But had Netanyahu not allowed Qatar money to come in, it would have come in from the rest of the world. The rest of the world was propping up Hamas, including the United States, to the tune of over $100 million, I think annually. It was an enormous sum of money that, of course, went into the coffers of the Hamas leaders so that they could stay in their chateaus in Qatar while the rest of the people in Gaza are suffering. They're all billionaires, of course, from all of this, the largesse of the European countries and America. So in my opinion, if he did allow funding to come in with the intention of it splitting rivalries, it's a pragmatic solution to the problem that was thrust into his lap. It's not a principled solution, and I don't necessarily expect principles from Benjamin Netanyahu. That's why lots of people are dissatisfied with him. Had I been king of Israel, I wouldn't even allow Gaza and the West Bank to exist as entities, let alone the degree to which they were sovereign, even last year. I would not have allowed it. But that's me.
So to me, there's a lot of problems there with Dave's position. One is, while it's unequivocally true that that Qatari money was funneled into Gaza, had Israel blocked that money, that aid coming from Qatar, my hunch, and I don't know it for certain, but it's based on experience with this issue, is that the people that support the Palestinians would have raised holy hell. Why is Israel blocking this aid money from going into Gaza? The people need this money. That's the first thing. Secondly, I actually interviewed the woman. Let me back up just a little. The story is that at some sort of a gathering, that Benjamin Netanyahu told his right flank that they should support the money going to Hamas, because by doing so, that would cause a rift between Hamas and the PLO or Fatah. Now, the woman who broke the
There already
story,
is a rift. By the
yes,
way, there already is a rift.
yeah, so the woman who broke the story is Lahav Harkov. I interviewed her, and she believes, and I don't know if she's right. I have no way to read Benjamin Netanyahu's mind, but she believes, based on her sourcing, that it wasn't Netanyahu's reason for allowing the money in, but what he was doing was justifying it to the right wing of his coalition by saying, look, if you don't want them to have a state, then you should support the money going in. I'm not saying I support his saying that or even doing it, anything else, but that's what politicians do. So I don't even know that it's true that he did it to prop up Hamas. The other thing that aggravates the hell out of me in this argument, when people say, well, of course the Palestinians hate the Jews are oppressing them, Israel's oppressing them. I would say this: even if it were true, which I don't believe it's true, that Israel has been oppressing them for 50 or whatever it is, 75 years since, 49. So yes, about 75 years, 48 maybe, I think. But even if it were true, the supporters of the Palestinians completely ignore the role of Islam in the equation. Completely. They act as if it's not an issue. They say things like free Palestine. The Palestinians deserve their freedom. In what world, if the Palestinians got a state, is it going to be a free society? I don't know. It's just dishonest. If you want to argue against Israel, but don't create this fiction that the Palestinians want their freedom, or that Islam doesn't play a role, or that the Quran doesn't refer to Jews as apes and swine, because it does. And when you have Islamic fundamentalists, they don't want a dominant Jewish state in their region. It's that simple. It wouldn't matter how kind they were to the Palestinians. And I just think it's either dishonest or ignorant to just ignore the Islamic part in this.
Yeah, I think for the pundits, it's dishonest. For the other folks who don't even know which river and which sea they're talking about when they're chanting it on the protest lines, it's ignorance. But look, like I said, you sort of alluded to it. Benjamin Netanyahu's pragmatism. That's exactly what I was referring to. Lincoln, what was the Civil War? What was the Civil War about? American Civil War. What was that about?
the South wanted to secede because they thought Lincoln would ultimately end slavery.
There you go. So it was really about slavery. They knew from probably the Northwest Ordinance on, probably from the Declaration of Independence, they knew that slavery was going to be a serious plank in the eye of the American moral fiber. They knew it was going to be a problem. Lincoln understood it to be the driving force behind the rift between the North and the South. And yet he made it a states' rights and unions issue because he could not paint that picture to people politically at the time. And he couldn't do it until about 1863 when he came out with the Emancipation Proclamation. And then he cautiously put it out there through that Emancipation Proclamation that the war was more or less about slavery. But for 2.5, 3 years, he towed a rather pragmatic line. And I think Netanyahu, given the cards that he was given, is towing a pragmatic line. Like I said, I don't think it's right. I don't think Gaza should exist. I don't think the West Bank should exist as separate entities. I think Israel should be one state. And the Arabs there absorbed in the way they were, the way the 2 million or so were previously, or they go to Egypt and Jordan respectively and leave. It's up to them. But I don't think two states can work given the ideological bent of the Palestinian people, which, as you say, is not about liberty at all. It's not a freedom movement. It's not a liberation movement. It is a genocide disguised by Marxist tropes, basically, of anti-colonialism and anti-capitalistic tropes, in order to give it a moral weight that it doesn't in fact have in life.
Okay, so I think you've done a very good job, by the way, of handling the questions about Israel. I really wish that Dave would debate you on the subject. He probably
But I would
won't.
come at it from the perspective of principles, and I don't think libertarians understand what principles are.
Well, yes, I tend to agree. Many don't. Let me put it that way. At least the Dave Smith wing, I don't think understand what principles
Certainly
are.
not ethical principles.
Yes. So, but you mentioned, we've been talking about this debate, and we've talked about Twitter, and you had a debate with Clint Russell on Josie, the redheaded libertarian or redheaded Republican pretending to be a libertarian, whatever. But you had a debate on her show. And by the way, let me just say that there's a lot of objectivists out there that think that these types of debates shouldn't happen, that it's somehow sanctioning our enemies if we debate them. I disagree with that. In principle, I agree with the idea of sanction, that you don't want to sanction evil. But I disagree that by destroying somebody intellectually, you are sanctioning them. And I think that objectivists a lot of times make a mistake, because you allow the virus to grow without just snuffing it out by debating it. So I applaud your willingness to debate Clint Russell, even though I don't think he's a very fine gentleman. I don't think he's intellectually honest. And I think Josie's reprehensible, but I still think that it was the right thing to do for you to debate him. Now, while you were on that show, you had this moron chime in, this Top Lobster. And let me just give a little background. This Top Lobster belongs to this crew. They call themselves the Tower Gang. And if anybody's ever seen the Emmett Otter Christmas Carol special, or the Tower Gang is the River Bottom Nightmare Band. These guys think they're edgy. They go online, they pretend to be tough, and they pretend that they're going to say things that are politically incorrect. Really, they're just a bunch of assholes. Let me just put that out there. And they're a bunch of cowards who I think probably got bullied in high school. And now can make up with it because they're on a keyboard behind a thing. But anyways, so while you're in this debate, this asshole, and people know that me, I generally don't talk like this, but I'm so sick of these people online pretending to be gangsters. It's just aggravating. And maybe I shouldn't let it bother me, but this bothered me because of what it caused and what followed. And I'll get into that in a minute. But so anyways, he chimes in because on her show, Spaces with Josie, you're allowed to ask questions. So he comes in and says to you, well, aren't you the gay actor? And I thought you handled it well, because you didn't just tell him, look, yeah, I did, to an extent. I mean, I thought you got angry. I mean, but it was understandable. You were caught off guard. You were there to have an intellectual discussion. And this is what it devolved to with this jerk. Now, subsequent to that, you had the followers of these people, of the Clint Russells, of the Josies of the world, the people who throw out assertions that they can't back up. And they all started sort of piling on. And this is why it bothered me, because you're my friend. When they do it to me, I really don't. I mean, it's annoying. But when I saw them doing it to you, there's a part of me that just wants to say, do you guys want to just meet us somewhere? You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't really do that. Let me be clear. I've given up violence long ago, but I still think there's people like that, Mike Tyson in an interview I see, he says, I love tough guys. He said, you got a lot of guys, they pretend to be tough, but they're not tough. That's these guys.
Yeah.
How does it affect you when you're trying to have an intellectual discussion to have these guys just, and they're nonstop. It's like they're like, I don't even know what cockroaches. I don't know how to describe them, but like, how does that affect you? I mean, I know it irritates you, but for how long? Because you're in the arena of ideas. These people clearly are.
Well, one, I mean, the good part about it is it exposes that part of the libertarian movement that is the millstone around the libertarian movement's neck, and why they're going to die on this hill. They are going to die. First of all, they're going to die on the Israeli-Gaza war. I think this will be the nail in the coffin of the Libertarian Party. We could have a discussion about that at some point if you think I'm wrong. But to show that, just to expose them for the immature little 12-year-old brats that they are, acting like schoolyard bullies, shows how emotionally and mentally immature they are. And for me, if I were looking to the libertarian movement as an alternative, I would see the mental age of these guys and say, this is not something that I want to engage in. I don't want people like this. These guys think that they're statesmen. They think they're arguing in the realm of ideas. They're punks. It would completely turn me off. Does it affect me? Yeah. In the moment, it surprised me to be talked to like that. I expected I was going into friendly territory. I expected Josie to have my back and protect me. I think I could have handled it a lot more calmly, but I was just so surprised. I think I reflexively lashed out. And the bad thing about reflexively lashing out online is that the little pricks that are their friends, who wouldn't fucking come near you once you started beating the fuck out of their friend, will start, piling on all of a sudden. Like they smell blood in the water and they think it's their time to pile on because they're a bunch of cowards, and a bunch of simpletons and mouth breather cowards. And so it bothers me, but then I realized, I can't engage with these people. They're not interested in engaging. They're interested in impressing their friends or getting one up on you. They're sort of popularity, secondhand, mouth breathing secondhander. So for folks out there who are aspiring to this, you should know they are the weakest motherfuckers on the planet. They are as weak as you get mentally, in every respect. They are weak little motherfuckers, and they get their self-esteem by trying to attack you and build up their stature in the eyes of their friends, but they're really jerk-offs. And so once that became a felt sense to me, not just an abstract idea, I just started blocking them and saying, fuck you, I'm blocking you because you're dumb. I'm blocking you because but you have to make that abstraction real to yourself. You have to, I know they're dumb. I know they're immature. I know they're silly. I know they're really cowards. But you can't really do anything about it or feel the appropriate way about it until it becomes an ingested value, right? And once I've ingested that value, you've noticed that I don't even entertain arguments with these guys anymore. I block them completely. I did say to Lobster, what's his name again?
Top Lobster.
Top Lobster. I did say to that jackass.
Plato, we can call him Plato Gangster if you want.
Yeah, he's a fuck. I said to him, you wouldn't say anything to me in real life. He said, oh, I would, and you wouldn't do a damn thing about it. And I said, well, you're right. I'm not going to punch you in the mouth for talking shit to me on a show. But if you sign an NDA, we go on a show, let's see what happens. NDA, not an NDA, a waiver. You sign a waiver, like a medical waiver. So, and we both sign it in advance, and then we know, gloves come off when you talk shit. I have the right to get up and go at you, or you can come at me. I mean, I don't say things. It's not my first impulse to insult somebody or say crappy things to
No.
them. So, I mean, the only recourse I would have is if he attacks me, then I can defend myself fully. And I just want him to know I would do it with great vigor. And I don't know what that means. He's a young man. I fight younger guys than me 3-4 times a week. Sometimes I get my ass handed to me. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't. But the guys like that, look, I'm all for that maxim that everybody deserves a good stiff jab every once in a while. Just a good solid shot in the mouth, just to show you where you're at. I get this multiple times a week. I'm showed where I stand on the level of my fellow man, and I like it. It's good. It's educational. It keeps me, I don't want to say humble, but it keeps me contextual. It helps me know where I stand in the world, right?
Now,
So
you're
a
talking
lot of
about
guys,
jujitsu. For those that don't know, Mark is big into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And just how does the jiu-jitsu, I know you absolutely love it. How does it help you? Is it compatible with your objectivism? How do they work together? Because you really tout the benefits of it, and it's not just physical for you.
right? Well, I was talking to Peter Boghossian a couple of weeks ago, and he's a purple belt, brown belt level jiu-jitsu guy, which means he's a bad motherfucker. Um, I'm nowhere near that level of integration. But he said if he's not doing jiu-jitsu 5 times a week, he gets really sort of in his head in a bad way. And I feel that too. Since I've been in Paris, I get maybe 2, 3, sometimes 4 workouts a week, jiu-jitsu. And it is taxing. It's like going there, even if you get your ass beat, I feel good. I just feel released. It's compatible with objectivism because it really is about solving problems. And it's in sort of an inductive art. You don't learn a series of techniques and then get tested, memorize those and get tested. You learn principles and then you try to integrate those principles into actual real life scenarios. So in the live role, when you're rolling with somebody, you're trying to put together things that right? Wide principles that and a lot of times you will find yourself doing a technique that you haven't learned, but you do it naturally because you understand a certain principle and it's coming out in the role. So it's an extremely creative art, which I am just barely scratching the surface of. I mean, yes, I'm a huge fan, but I mean, I roll with sick guys who are just amazing. I mean, even here in Paris, they're very competition minded, and so there are white belts who are just off the hook. I mean, they're just off the hook. They're not white belt level, right? So they have a very offensive approach to their jujitsu. For most white belts, it's about defense, 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 defense. And then you get to blue belt, and you start integrating offense into your game. These guys are trying to go for points from the moment they start rolling with you. So they're trying to get position on you all the time. So it's a change of pace for me, and it's sort of cool because I'll have guys trying to submit me or sweep me or do stuff to me all the time. And it's especially when they're young and strong and athletic, so it's a good place for me to practice being an old guy practicing old man jiu-jitsu with the young folks.
Do you find that it's taken you out of your comfort zone to get
Oh,
involved in
dude,
that?
it
And how
is.
much of a benefit is it to come out of your comfort zone, not just in there, but in general in life?
I think growing in life is all about living with discomfort. It's all about living with discomfort. When I train, when I do my interval training, it's about pushing the boundaries of discomfort further and further and further and further. So you look back a year from after you started training, you're like, wow, I can deal with so much more discomfort now than I could before. When I first started jujitsu, for the first 4 weeks, my entire body felt like it had been crushed. Like my ribs were killing me. Now, you could be 400 pounds and sitting on top of me, and I'm not, you're not going to crush the air out of me. I might not be able to do a lot of stuff to you, but you're not going to, make me tap because you got top pressure like that. So it's like I've been able to push the boundaries of discomfort, and you do that more and more with jujitsu. You find yourself, oh, I tap there. A year ago, I tapped so much faster than I did now. Or I found an escape route, when I got patient and started living with this feeling or this panic instead of reacting to the panic. That's what made me so mad about responding to Top Lobster the way I did, because I reacted instead of just going, hey, who's this douchebag? Get him out of here. I didn't have to do that. So you start to learn what you have to do, right? You pare down life to its essentials in a way through jiu-jitsu, and it helps you have a wider vision. And when I don't have that practice every day, taking it out of me, a couple hours at a time, getting the snot beat out of me a little bit by people, I don't have the same perspective. You feel me?
I do.
Yeah.
You just mentioned reacting, and there's something that stuck with me. When I was 18 years old, my mother had a friend over who had just gotten out of prison. He was a gang member, big guy. This guy shook your hand, and it was like one of the like he's gonna break your every finger in your hand. But I was talking to him, and he told me, he said, Mike, he said, whenever you go to these, it's because you're defeated here.
Yeah.
And at the time, I'm like, who the this guy, 40-year-old guy, going to tell me about fighting. I don't care. But I realized later on that that's in large part true. That if somebody's able to say something to me that leads me to want to fight them or hurt them, they're basically controlling me. They've completely eviscerated my rational mind, and now I'm just reacting, and somebody else is in control. And I don't like that. And I've always kept that, what he told me, in my head. And it's interesting because I don't know, he was a drug addict, maybe died of an overdose. I don't ultimately know what happened to him, but those words have stuck with me long after he said them, and actually came back to me long after, I had dismissed them when I was changing, because I remember I was in a group in prison, and it was a anger management. And the mental health counselor said, if guys in here are antagonizing you by saying stuff to you, you do not have to resort to violence. And all of us in the group said, oh, yes, you do. You cannot allow people to talk to you like that in prison. You have to fight. And she said, no, you don't. And it took me years to figure out that she was right, that I might choose. I might say, you know what, it's not worth it to allow people to talk to me like that. And then other people are going to do the same. I might reason through it, incorrectly as it may be, but I'm still choosing, and I don't have to make that choice. When I realize that I'm in control of my own behavior and actions, it's a really empowering thing. And I'm getting the sense that in the jujitsu, they kind of teach you that sort of thing, probably in a far more eloquent way than I'm putting it. But nevertheless, that you are in control of your mind and your body, and you don't have to react to assholes like, the lobster fellow.
Yeah. Jiu-jitsu really is about controlling the violence. It's about, and not just controlling the violence of the other person and redirecting the violence of the other person. It's redirecting and controlling the violence in you. And I have that, I have that sensibility. I've had that ethic for a while. And sometimes I just lose track of it, like I did with that guy, because I got surprised. But yeah, it's like I have a couple of I have lots of violent friends, right? They're a lot of them are fighters, and one guy's dead now, but he and his brother were very violent guys, and they have one of them has kids, and he was telling his kid, he was emulating fighting to his kid. I was over there, I'm like, I turned to his kid and I'm saying, don't listen to that. I was literally contradicting his dad right in front of him. I'm like, don't listen to that shit. I said, if you fight, you're stupid. You're a stupid person. And I do believe that. Some guy challenged me recently to a thing. He wants to fight me. He's like, oh, I want to street fight you. I'm like, what, are you dumb? What, are you 12? It's like, then you fight. I want to street fight you. No rules. What are you?
Are you an adult? Like, what's going on?
Who does that? You can't, it's like fights like that, you go to jail, you go to the morgue. There's no way out of it. And, nothing except liberty is really worth that, to be honest with you. And some punk on social media isn't worth it. You don't street fight. You know, it's stupid. You guys, anybody who suggests such a thing is stupid. Bar fighting, stupid. All my friends have done it. They're all crazy. They have all cleaned out bars, you know, beating the shit out of people. I've seen that for a long time as being, you know, very, very, very bad. As proficient as they are at fighting, there's an aspect of them that's not in control of the situation because they let that shit, you
No,
know,
and you never
overpower
know
them.
what the other guy is going to do, right? You don't get to make rules in these situations. There's a guy I knew in prison. This guy was known for stabbing people. That's what he did
Yeah.
all the time. And he had words with another guy on the basketball court, and the guy in the basketball court said to him, you know, what do you want to do? Meaning, you know, you want to throw hands with me? And he looked at him. The guy who challenged him to fight, his name was Mike, and the guy looked at him and said, "Oh, Mike, I don't fight." and, and, and the guy knew exactly what he meant when he said, "I don't fight." And he said, "Okay," and walked away. But the point is, he recognized that when you put yourself in those positions, you don't get to control how the other guy responds. And you could say it's wrong, it's, you know, cowardice or whatever you want, but you're still putting yourself in a very dangerous situation.
Yes, yes. This is what I've been talking about with the Israeli-Palestinian thing too. I said when I talk about civility and war, and people talking about laws of war, I'm like, who in the fuck are you kidding? You gave up law when you invaded this country.
Yes.
You are now in the law of the jungle, and that is kill or be killed. That's where you are now by your choice. And if I start a fight with some guy in the street, I am now submitting to that, whatever that
Yes.
is. Guy breaks into my house, he's now in the law of the jungle. And it's one of us, he's gonna leave that house on my fucking terms. All right. That means I'm dead or he is. There's gonna be no thing about it. And that's what people have to try to understand. They're attempting to, as Ankar Gate said, sanitize war. And that's part of their abhorrence with what's happening. They can't seem to do the moral calculus that, well, Palestine is making it ugly, not the Israelis. Palestine is. They gave up law, they gave up negotiation, they gave up persuasion when they invaded. Now they have one choice. Well, two choices: surrender, or die. That's it. That's all their choices. That's on the defender's terms: surrender or die. And that is morally just. It's morally just. And I wish the rest of the world would get behind Israel on that.
You have your own show now where you discuss the relationship between philosophy and mental health, which is very creative, by the way. I really like it.
Thank you.
What's that like for you? Do you enjoy doing it? Do you find it beneficial to your own mental health and philosophical viewpoints?
I do, you know, and I've been on the couch since I was a kid, since I was 16. I didn't come from as horrendous a background as you, but you know, it was a broken home and lots of craziness, violence, and threats of violence in my life, and lots of instability, uh, and and I knew that I had issues and that I needed to work them out from a very young age. So that might have been, I don't know where that gift came from, but I never felt as much solidity as I did once I discovered rational philosophy, objectivism. And once I started applying that actively to my life. It's one thing to know the philosophies and principles of objectivism. It's another thing to actually apply them to your life. And so I've applied those relatively late in life, but I felt a greater psychological soundness with these principles. And it's a certitude, a certain kind of certitude that comes when you know that there is no option beyond the truth and reality, and that you owe it to yourself to be absolutely honest and to have integrity. You realize that your honesty and your integrity is the defense for your heart and your soul, and it's what coheres you and makes you a whole person. And once you start to realize that thing, all of your actions take on a significance, and you think about your actions a lot more, and you have a wider context for everything that you do. And as a result, you feel human, you feel much more together. And I feel like philosophy's helped me even more than the realizations I would have in the therapeutic scenario, and perhaps it's helped me integrate that stuff. I'm still trying to figure out which came first. Was it, where one ends and the other begins? I'm not quite sure yet. It's sort of what I'm hunting for. But it is helping me to listen to these philosophers and psychologists who incorporate philosophy in their work. It's interesting for me to hear them talk about life and integrating principles in life, and it helps me to be a lot more clear about what I want and how I want to live.
Well, that's excellent. So before we wrap up, where can people find you? Where, because you've got a whole lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, so I'm on Mark R. Pellegrino on X, and I'm on Mark Ross Pelly on Instagram. I've got a Patreon channel now. That's what those interviews come from. The intersection of philosophy and psychology is on Patreon. We do release them to my YouTube channel. I also have a YouTube channel where you can see my reality checks. I haven't done a reality check in a while because I've been in Paris for the last 2 months, but I have I have a number written and a couple of new ones that I want to put out with Israel. The next one I put out will be on the accomplishments of Israel versus the accomplishments of Gaza and the West Bank. What kinds of who contributes to humanity most, and why? I think will be an interesting question to pose and answer. And yeah, and I'm willing to talk to anybody. Unlike Dave Smith, I like talking about ideas. I don't make it about popularity contests. Anybody can have a great idea or a bad idea, and we're living right now in at a turning point in history where ideas matter, and every person who has a bad idea needs to be resisted. Every person who has a good idea needs to be promoted and helped along the path. They need to know they're not alone, because it's easy to feel that way on social media. So to me, I'm in the trenches right here with everybody else, trying to work it out, trying to do the battle in my own way for what I think is good. And that's where I do it on social media. So come out there and join me, folks, in the battle.
You certainly are the anti-prima donna. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you.
No doubt about that. Definitely do not fit the stereotype of the Hollywood actor. That's for sure. Ironic that you played Lucifer, I guess.
The ultimate prima donna.
Yeah. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Likewise.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.